we start, because some people are going to try to take more than their 12 minutes.
Oh, she is so rude.
She really is. Yeah. I had to live with that for how many years?
It hasn't changed a bit.
I hear you.
I am delighted to see everyone. I am Donna Tripp Raven. Most of you have at least seen me in the past. I'm your moderator today. And this is our third of the Bridging People, Places, and Passions event that we've done. The first two were, I think, very successful. And this one looks like it's going to be just dynamite. Today, we'll hear about social justice initiatives from classmates Deborah Drysdale and Freehofer Manley and Karen Frankel Blum. Before we start, I would just like to thank Ginny Meeker Munkowitz, Patsy Kimball Rogers, and Marty Ryan Severance for doing just incredible work getting everything organized and all the difficulties smoothed out. They've really put in yeoman work, and I think Marty and Ginny especially have done a lot of work with the college, and they're very close to getting these things up on the college YouTube channel soon. So, brief rundown. Each panel member will have a few minutes, 12, to tell us a bit about her experiences in the field of social justice. And then there's about 5 minutes that we've used at the beginning for everyone to meet and greet. And at the end, you'll have a few minutes for questions. You can also put your questions and any other information that you wanted to chat. At this point, I'd like to ask everyone to please mute themselves. If you don't mute your computer, what happens is we get a lot of feedback. So, okay. Our panelists span the country today. We're going to start on the West Coast in California with Deborah Drysdale. We'll talk a little bit about her own social justice journey. Take it, Deborah.
Okay. I'm starting my stopwatch, Donna.
Okay.
Just so you know. Okay. Can you guys see this now? Is this the right version? Okay. And you can hear me. Yes, all good. Okay. So this is a big topic, social justice. So I decided to talk about it from my own story in it. And instead of taking one issue. So here we go. How did I get started in all this? Well, the simple answer is the people I met, the stories I heard, and the things I saw. Using Barack Obama's words, I was a somewhat improbable candidate to become an anti-racism activist, a white, solidly middle-class girl from suburban Milwaukee. The only people of color I saw at home were cleaning women going to work on my block. My awareness of skin color started on my parents' farm in rural Virginia, Bath County, the South. I spent all my summers there. I'm hearing music. A colored woman, as we called her at the time, or as we said at the time, named Fanny, worked for us on the farm. We all loved and adored her. One day, Nana took us to visit Natural Bridge, which was a tourist attraction nearby. And I was learning to read and sounded out the word colored on a bathroom. I said, "What's that, Nana?" And she said, "That, dear, is the bathroom Fanny would have to use." I peeked in, and I totally remember seeing fly paper hanging from the ceiling, buzzing with flies, yuck. And it was disgusting and it smelled really bad. And I said, "Why would she have to use that one?" And she said, "That's how it is here in Virginia. It's not fair and it's not right." Fanny was the person who tried to clean us up. We were ragamuffins and, I was horrified. And I remember that feeling in my gut. Back on the farm, whoops, I want to go back. Back on the farm, I saw on the road in front chain gangs of colored men chained together, working in the road all day long, hot sun, hot tar. And the idea of skin color started to filter in. I was a huge baseball fan, and this was Billy Bruton, my favorite player. I had no idea he was also an activist for civil rights. He got tired of being treated just as a ball player. He wanted also to be treated like a free Black man. In high school, I read lots of books. As I was growing up, my awareness of patterns of prejudice and unfairness were growing. It was dawning on me that skin color was a big deal in the US, South and North. I started reading books, Black Like Me, maybe some of us all read them then, the autobiography of Malcolm X, The Other America. And then I went to Wells, and luckily had Mr. Trelease for history. Oh my God, what a gift he was. He, in the spring break of sophomore year, he drove 4 of us Wells students down to Raleigh, North Carolina, to join a voter registration drive along with students from Shaw University, a historically Black college. That week changed my life. I took copious notes, obviously. My partner was Vernon. We knocked on hundreds of doors in poor Black neighborhoods. For a Black guy and a white girl to knock on your door was unheard of in Raleigh and often met with suspicion. When we explained we were registering voters, folks usually pivoted and welcomed us in with open arms, offering lemonade or iced tea or whatever they had. My heart was warm. It was different from the summer before that when I had joined the Tom Tuttle for Congress campaign in my own neighborhood and rung many, many doorbells and had many, many doors slammed in my face. At the end of the week in Raleigh, the Shaw students drove us to the bus station at 3 a.m. When Vernon hugged me goodbye, he said, and I remember it so clearly, this was the week that was. We were all in tears that it was over, and my value system and life purpose were firmly taking shape. I'd learned about Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King, and had joined students who tried to take down a no colored allowed sign from a hotel, but it was too high, we couldn't reach it. That summer, I registered voters in Black neighborhoods in Washington, D.C., came back to Wells, chose my senior thesis topic, home rule in Washington, D.C., a topic sadly still unresolved today, D.C. statehood. After graduation, I joined VISTA, the Domestic Peace Corps, and was sent to New York City. In VISTA training, I lived with the Garcia family in the South Bronx, a mom and her 6 kids. I saw poverty firsthand. 9-year-old Irma gave me her room to sleep in. There were ratones, rats, under the bed. I got through that first night and many more thinking, if Irma can do this, I can do it. I knocked on many more doors. I remember the Torres family, New York City, dead of winter. Landlord provided no heat or hot water, ice literally thick on the windows inside, using the stove for heat. Antonio, the 6-year-old, was sick. Of course he was sick. I learned firsthand about tenants' rights, welfare rights, housing rights, how the courts were fair sometimes and not others, for some people and not for others. I experienced community and sticking together and resilience and grit. I experienced being the only white person on the block. I kept on seeing the same patterns. It wasn't that people weren't smart, were lazy, or didn't try. Something bigger than individual circumstance was going on. Things were set up like that. My resolve to keep working in this arena heightened. I just had to figure out how. And then it was the 60s. I started protesting the racism, the war in Vietnam, for tenants' rights and women's rights. I'm skipping a story or two here, Donna. In 1970, I ended up living in San Francisco, where I still live. I was a psychotherapist in private practice for 30 some years and loved every minute of it. But I always remembered the lessons from Fanny and Mr. Trelease and the Garcias and Torres families. One day early in 2001, I Googled anti-racism and found the upcoming World Conference Against Racism, Durban, South Africa. I wanted to go. I wangled my way onto a delegation of the California Women's Foundation by saying I would do some kind of activism after the trip. That was music to my ears, as I had received an unexpected inheritance from my grandmother and was getting ready to retire from my day job. I wanted to be a good steward of her legacy and do some anti-racism work. This was the conference in South Africa. It was quite a trip. There were inspiring activists from all over the world. We went to Robben Island, where Nelson Mandela served during apartheid. Soon after the trip, the Women's Foundation notified me a group was forming to work on lessons learned in Durban. I jumped at the chance and headed into my next chapter, donor activism. We formed RGHR, Race, Gender, and Human Rights Fund, and set about defining our purpose. We chose to support under the radar groups impacted at the intersection of racism, sexism, and human rights violations. We picked our issue, the disproportionate mass incarceration of people of color in the US, and our particular niche, women and girls in California. Amazingly and thankfully, RGHR still exists. Year 20, we've granted over $6 million to help incubate 25 some organizations. We've met awesome folks. Michelle Alexander's book traces the continuous thread of slavery from slavery in the US to Jim Crow to current mass incarceration of people of color. I visited the San Quentin prison, the Prison University Project, and sat in on an English level class. Men were sharing their very personal writings. No dry eyes in that room. That project, yay, as of last week, became the only fully accredited college in the US operating inside a prison. It is now Mount Tamalpais College. There are no such programs for women in the state of California. How can that be? California has a huge women's population, prison population. Along with activist groups, now we've started a women's exploratory group to tackle this situation. As a donor activist, I got to meet many other folks. We visited women's prisons in Central California and sat in small groups of the women. We heard how school and job training programs were getting cut and people were bored all day long, how it was really tough to get enough sanitary supplies, how some women were shackled during childbirth. Many stories were told, tears shed, connections made in those groups. At the end of the day, we got to leave. The women inside didn't. We got to know formerly incarcerated women who, upon release, established programs to help other women coming out of prison. It's tough to be turned out, middle of the night, middle of California, a paper bag with $50. What are you supposed to do? No home to go to, no skills. Easier probably just to return to your old drug-infested block and probably cycle right back to prison. Susan Burton and Kim Carter both started programs with basically $0 but infinite grit and heart and smarts. Their programs grew into nationally replicated models. They both became CNN heroes. How cool is that? Kim says, our GHR invested in us when nobody else did. You guys believed in us from the start. And I say back, what a privilege to have been able to do so. Another person is Brian Stevenson and his Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. He's been called the Nelson Mandela of North America with very good reason. EJI established the lynching memorial. It's a brilliant memorial to the 4,600 plus heretofore forgotten victims of lynching. The coffin-shaped steel slabs hang outside from above as if from trees. When it rains, the steel rusts and the water runs red. Whoops. I found Bath County in where the farm was among all the slabs. Anthony Abner was a victim of lynching terror there in 1893. So, retirement until now. This improbable white girl's story stands squarely on the shoulders of regular people as well as activists who came before, the people I met, the stories I heard, and for this and the things I've seen. For this honor, I have infinite gratitude. Thanks, guys, for listening. The end, my timer went off, so I don't know how I did. Anyway.
That was incredible, Deborah. Thank you so much.
Thanks
I'm
for
sure
listening.
everyone has just so many questions. Our plan is to hold questions until the end. I can't imagine we're going to fit this all in, but
sorry, my timer stopped. It was rude of it, or it went to sleep or something.
Okay. I was just typing in chat, trying to figure out how to tactfully say your time's up. Moving now from the West Coast, we're going to head to the Southeast and go to Florida, where I understand it's 84 degrees today, with Ann Freehofer Manley.
Okay, thank you. I want to start by just saying at Wells, I majored in history, and I thought I would spend my life teaching. And I did go to graduate school, and I did teach for a few years. But when my first marriage ended in divorce, I wanted a new beginning. And I had met some people who had shared with me something about the career of urban and regional planning. And it interested me, so I decided to apply again to graduate schools in urban and regional planning. And everyone but one turned me down because I didn't have an undergraduate degree in engineering. But Virginia Tech said, please come and we're going to pay for it. So of course I went. And it's a 2-year program. And in the first year, you take a lot of classes that are the same for everyone, water and sewer systems and roads and land use and so on. But in the second year, you get to specialize. And I specialized in health and social service planning. And that was rather new for them to let somebody do that, but they were very flexible, and I did. And in the second year, I actually got hired by the New River Valley Planning District Commission to be their first ever gerontology planner. And that was a wonderful experience, traveling around to meet all the people in the rural areas and try to set up Title VII nutrition programs and an area agency on aging. But then I married again, and Ron had a chance to come to Florida to work for Orange County, which is the county that Orlando is in. And so we moved to Orlando, and I just went out to meet people, and I got a job right away as the associate director of the Human Services Planning Council here, which was like a United Way planning agency, if you are familiar with what those organizations used to be like. And but it was also funded by the county and the city. And we developed an information and referral system, and I became the executive director and worked there for about 15 years, developing programs in the community and helping the county and city decide how to spend their social service dollars. But then I was recruited away from there by the largest private foundation here in Central Florida. And I worked for them for 25 years until I retired in 2015 and helped them give away $100 million here locally. So it was a wonderful career. And while I was working as a family, we were members of St. Luke's United Methodist Church. And I bring that up because St. Luke's is a church known locally for its involvement in the community. When the church was constructed, the large cross was put outside of the walls to remind us that what we needed to be doing was outside of the church itself. And St. Luke's has founded several nonprofits. The first one that I was very involved with while I was working is called Shepherd's Hope, and our former pastor, Dr. Bill Barnes, had a vision of us being able to provide health care to all those who didn't have it. And it started with one clinic with St. Luke's, and then we got money from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and from the foundation where I worked. And it now has about 15 clinics, each one sponsored by a different church, and they're not all Methodist churches. Some of them are Catholic. We have one sponsored by a mosque, and it's going still today, and it's been very, very successful in meeting the needs of people who don't have health insurance. The church has done a lot of different things, feeding people, trying to pay for housing, other things like that. And a few years ago, they got very frustrated that they felt they were spread very thin and they couldn't really document what was happening. So we went through this year of rethinking as a church what we should be doing. And we got some training from Bob Lumpkin, who is out of Atlanta. And he has written a book called Toxic Charity. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to read it. It's very short, but it will change your mind about some things. And the church, many members came for the week-long training to learn about how to think differently. And what I'm going to share with you about this new nonprofit that we started, believe it or not, January of 2020, to address poverty, is an outgrowth of what we learned from Bob. He encouraged us to identify one area where we would focus our efforts, one geographic area. And he encouraged us to have that be relatively near the church. And of course, this church is in a upper middle income neighborhood. So that was a bit challenging, but not that far from us, there's a place called East Winter Garden, and it is very much a low poverty income area. And so we focused on East Winter Garden. It was not easy to get to that decision as a church. Everybody had an opinion, as you can imagine, with a large church, and coming to an agreement was tough. But this program and Shepherd's Hope both are built on the idea that what we can do as one church can be replicated. And that's, the church started working in East Winter Garden about 6 years ago. And some of the information that I'm going to share from Poverty Solutions Group, which is the new nonprofit, is as a result of some of the work that the church did in East Winter Garden all this time. But Poverty Solutions Group is trying to take that work to scale into other neighborhoods in the Central Florida area. So I'm going to do my best to share my screen and tell you about this new nonprofit. Okay, come on. Okay, we named the group Poverty Solutions Group because we're not in the business of providing direct services. We're really a collaborative organization committed to sustainable poverty reduction. We've based all our work on emerging best practices, and we're trying to empower individuals and households to achieve economic stability and engage the broader community to address the systemic barriers that perpetuate community-wide poverty. And this is our theory of change. Right now, on the left, you'll see this circle that goes round and round and round, and people go from crisis to crisis to crisis. And the cliff effects that are in the center, and this is a phrase that's now become very popular nationwide to talk about how if people begin to get training and can progress in their jobs, they start to lose government support from in maybe childcare, maybe healthcare, maybe food stamps, whatever. And their income doesn't really increase. So they turn down promotions because they can do better. In fact, there's a study that came out of the Federal Reserve System in Atlanta. They've been very involved with this, that a family of four making $14,000 and having all the benefits that they're entitled to at that level, when they get to making $50,000 on their own and without any benefits, they don't qualify for benefits anymore. It's the same level of income for them. And so this is something that's being looked into actually at the federal level to see if there isn't some way to ease people off of benefits instead of just completely dropping them as their income changes. But our goal is to move people through individual change and community change to self-awareness and knowledge and social capital so that they can become independently thriving households. Let's see. And this is the organizational chart. I mean, we have an executive director. We actually have 2 full-time staff people and a half-time person. And one of the things we do is immersive learning. And I'll talk a little bit about COPE, which is cost of poverty experience. And the other is the Circles program. Both of these are national models that we researched before we decided what we would do. The cost of poverty experience is an emerging best practice developed by think tank out of Ohio. It's a structured experience of 2 to 3 hours that gives participants the opportunity to experience poverty firsthand through the stories of real families. You actually take on the role of a real family. And it also captured in the experience is the role that the broader community plays in their interactions with families and how policies and systems hinder the progress of people to lift themselves out of poverty. The causes of poverty are individual choices, like leaving children with unsafe caregivers or resorting to crime when no employers or landlords give them an opportunity because of past offenses. And then there's systemic factors like access to fair credit, quality housing, cost-effective, efficient public transportation, policy of barriers such as sanctions for ex-offenders, driver's license removal if you don't pay child support, and the cliff effect when transitioning off of different programs. And also the last is the isolation. And I think this is the area that we learned the most about. We'd never thought about how isolated low-income families are from middle and upper income individuals. And most of us, I know I couldn't have raised my children if I hadn't had the support of my parents, some friends, some neighbors. We have social capital, we have connections. And many of these people in the low income neighborhoods, they just didn't understand that or have that. And so it makes things much more difficult for them. And that's why Circles. And Circles is very different from any other direct service I've ever seen. And I say that because it is really the emphasis is on building relationships, and that's the driving force behind Circles. And the low-income individuals who agree to be part of Circles commit to 18 months of one meeting every week for 18 months. And they become the leaders. And the middle income people, who are these ladies, volunteers from our church, are the allies. And they are there to encourage and listen and help. No, wait a minute, gotta go back. The Circle allies serve as supportive helpers. And so I can give you some examples of that. We've had people help to repair cars, not by paying for it, but people who have a personal talent to repair a car. They might repair a car for someone in the low income neighborhood. And in fact, our church has just in the last 6 months during the pandemic started a car repair program at the church at one Saturday a month, where people can bring their cars and get their oil changed and different small things done to their cars. And all the leaders and the allies receive training. It's not like you go into this without having had training. And training in being a better listener, hearing other voices, hearing what the problems are, and helping people see how they can solve them. And then once the people from the low income neighborhoods, who are the leaders, come into the Circles program, they're matched with an ally. And in the first 6 months, we find that they're encouraged and empowered in their circle. In the next 6 months, they become leaders. They recognize their own assets. They build confidence. They start to develop a social network, and they begin decreasing their debt and reliance on public assistance. And in the last 6 months, they reach economic stability. Now, does it really work? And here's real data from the program. After 24 months, we see a 56% increase in income. After 18 months, we see 39% decrease in public benefits. After 18 months, we have a 70-point increase in credit score. And let me just say something here about this credit. You know, in low-income neighborhoods, people go to these payday loan places and they get themselves into a situation which is just awful, because after the first week, if they can't pay it back in a week, the interest goes to 11%, and then it goes to 24%, and then it goes to 35%, and it becomes a situation where they can't ever get out. And our church has always had a fund of maybe $25,000 a year where we would help somebody with rent, or maybe help somebody with a utility bill or something like that. And when we started this program, we took that $25,000 and we went to a local bank in Winter Garden and asked them, will you hold this as equity and make low interest loans to the people who are in our Circles program? And this bank agreed. Now, it's not easy to talk a bank into doing this, even when they're loaning your money. But we've had 100% repayment of these loans. And the amazing thing is, there was one woman, this is the story that I'm just amazed by. She owed $1,000 on her house, but she had refinanced it so many times through payday loans that she was at risk of losing her house. And we were able to get her into one of these low interest loans, pay off the payday loans, get her into one of these low interest loans which she paid back in 6 months. And now she owns her own house. And yes, after 18 months, we see a 33% increase in 2-year degrees, which is giving them the opportunity to move up and become viable. We've also seen people start their own businesses. We have a new grant that came to us this year from Florida Blue, which is the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation statewide. We competed for this, and we were a regional winner of 5,000, and then we competed. All the regional winners got to compete at the state level, and we won the $45,000, the one organization, because what we're doing is we're developing the ability to help people start their own businesses, because this is another way out of poverty. And there's cost to starting your own businesses. You gotta get licenses, and that costs money, and these people don't have the money. So this is a way to help them get their business started. And we've had several retired business people come on board as volunteers to help people start their own businesses.
And thank you so much. This is just an incredible story.
I just want one more. This is the last slide.
Okay.
That I want you to know that we've actually tested our return on investment, and we can say that it costs us $10,000 per circle leader for 2 years of engagement. And by the end of those 2 years, they are returning $15,000 back to the community by reduced public benefits and increased income. That's the end.
That's terrific. I sort of have a feeling that each one of these presentations could have taken the whole hour. I don't know how we're going to get all the questions in, because really I have a lot of questions. Moving on, the last speaker we have is Professor Emerita of Law from Suffolk University, Karen Frankel Blum, who has spent most of her professional career working in civil rights and especially police misconduct litigation. And you heard her a little earlier today talking about our next Supreme Court nominee. Karen.
Thank you, Donna. And I will try to be brief. Mine is going to read more like a law school class than a life story. But I just want to tip my hat to both Deborah and Ann, because those are amazing. And Deborah, I don't know how you didn't become a lawyer. I'm still sitting here trying to figure out why you didn't go to law school, but you just seemed like a natural.
I had a police record.
There you go. Don't we all? No, never mind. Anyhow, yeah, this is something that when I left Wells, I mean, I can go back and, I guess I'll blame my mother for a lot of things. And one of them is my sense of sort of social justice, because we always, from day one, had a lot of foreign students and people of color living in our house. And it was just like one big family. I didn't realize this was unusual at the time, but it evidently was. My mother was the only driving instructor. She did 3 jobs, but she was the only one who would teach Puerto Ricans in New Haven how to drive, not because she spoke any Spanish, which she did not, but just because she was very good at communicating in whatever manner she had. And she always felt like everyone should have a chance. In fact, my first court appearance was when I was 16, the summer before I started at Wells. My mother took a trip to Puerto Rico to visit some students who had lived with us at one point. And she said to me, "You have to go to court today because Jose, one of her students, driving students, had gotten his 3rd ticket for driving without a license. He had to work because he had 5 kids. And he just needed his driver's license. So anyway, my mother's, screaming at me, make sure they don't put him in jail. Make sure they don't put him in jail. So I, of course, 16, it was 102 degrees that day. I'll never forget it. Went down to the New Haven court and went in and sat in the back, and I heard Jose's name called out, and the judge, before I could say anything, the judge says 30 days in jail, and that'll be whatever it was, the bond or something. And I stand up in the back of the courtroom and say, you can't send Jose to jail. And the judge looks up like, who is this mad woman? And he said, I said, my mother says you can't send Jose to jail. Anyway, needless to say, I lost my first case, but Jose didn't drive again until he had a license. So I'm gonna do my screen sharing here. And this is the statute that I have spent my last 50 years or so working on, writing about, speaking about, and so forth. It's called Section 1983 by lawyers pretty much, and those in the legal field, but it was part of the Reconstruction legislation, and it was passed as part of the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. It simply, if you look at the language of the statute, which I won't read to you, but the idea is that this statute was enacted to provide a civil remedy. When police officers, I'm going to focus on police officers, but when police officers engage in wrongful conduct, they may be criminally prosecuted, as you all know, after watching the Derek Chauvin trial and the 3 officers who were just convicted along with him. But there may be criminal prosecution, but then there's also a civil remedy, and this is the statute that provides the civil remedy. And it's available to anyone whose constitutional rights have been violated by someone acting under color of state law. So by, it doesn't have to be a police officer, it can be a public school teacher, any public official essentially who violates your constitutional rights may be sued pursuant to this statute. And if you look at the statute, it says, if somebody does violate your constitutional rights while acting under color of law, they shall be liable. Statute says nothing about any kind of immunity. So I put this little hypo here because this is probably an easy example and one that you can, you'll get the idea of what I'm going to talk about, which is qualified immunity. And no one, no lay persons certainly had that in their vocabulary or talked about it or knew about it, I think, until the George Floyd murder. And then you heard a lot about qualified immunity because it was, for the first time in the sort of the mainstream press, and people were talking about it and criticizing it, and people became, I think, more aware of this doctrine. So I'm giving you this little hypo. Suppose you videotape police officers who are engaged in their duties in a public place. They're arresting somebody and you think they're using excessive force. You don't go up into their face, but you're standing across the street and you're videotaping this on your phone. And the officer sees you doing this and comes over and says, give me that phone, and you're under arrest. All right, well, you resist, but you do get arrested and you hand over the phone. The charges are subsequently dropped. And now you're suing these officers for violating your First Amendment right. The court, suppose you go to federal court, and the federal court says, you're right, Deborah, your civil rights have been violated by these police officers. And that's a First Amendment right that you have to videotape police when they are engaging in their duties in a public place. And your right has been violated. And you say, great, how much are you going to give me? Or how much is the jury going to give me? And the holdup there is, well, we'll see. You may get some money back, or you may not. And the officers may have what we call qualified immunity. And now you go back to the statute and you read it again and you says, yeah, but it says if officers violate my constitutional rights, they shall be liable. The statute says nothing about this qualified immunity. So where does that come from? And the answer is it comes from the court. It's a judge-made doctrine that the Supreme Court has imposed in this area of the law. And it applies when you are suing individual officers for damages. That's when they can raise this defense of qualified immunity. Now, for you to get over this defense, you have to prove two things. You have to, first of all, make out a case that your constitutional rights under current law have in fact been violated. And then the hard part is, assuming you can show a constitutional violation, you have to show that this right, the right to videotape police officers, was clearly established at the time of the challenged conduct, such that every reasonable officer would have understood that arresting you for engaging in this conduct violated your constitutional rights. That clearly established part is the qualified immunity defense that has been imposed in this area by the Supreme Court. This is as of the modern doctrine of qualified immunity came into play in 1982. But until 2009, the Supreme Court had told the lower courts, okay, when somebody raises this qualified immunity defense, there are two parts, you know, whether was there a constitutional violation and was the law clearly established? And the courts were told first to answer that question, the first question, before you get to the clearly established question. Now, why is that important, or why was it important? Because in answering the first question, you decide whether in fact this conduct violates the Constitution. You establish a standard. You tell officers and you tell citizens what the law is. Engaging in this conduct, yes, violates the Constitution. Now, even if you decide the law was not clearly established at the time, you now know that the next officer who does this will not get qualified immunity because you are now establishing precedent, right? That the law is this. So the next officer can't say, well, the law wasn't clearly established and I get qualified immunity. So that was what they called the order of battle before 2009. The courts were at least deciding the merits of the constitutional question. Since 2009, the Supreme Court came out with a decision in 2009 that said, you know what? You don't really have to decide that first question anymore. You don't have to decide whether the conduct violates the Constitution if you know that regardless of whether it violates the Constitution or not, you're going to grant qualified immunity because the law was not clearly established at the time. And so you can just skip to that second question because the officer, if he has qualified immunity, is not going to have to pay damages. As a result, what we have are a lot of courts, and I don't blame them. It's the much easier sledding path to just skip to that second question and say, you know what, this is a really tough constitutional issue. I don't know whether this conduct violates the Constitution or not, but I know one thing for sure. There was no case law out there. There was nothing that made this clearly established at the time. So this officer is going to get qualified immunity. So let's go back to the example of, you know, your First Amendment right has been violated. Where do the courts look to figure out if the law was clearly established? Well, they look first, is there a Supreme Court case on point? And generally there's not, because the Supreme Court only hears about, 75 cases a year. And usually if something's really outrageous, it doesn't get to the Supreme Court. It goes up on questions that are tough one way or the other. So if there's no Supreme Court case on point, then you look to what's called your circuit. So here in the First Circuit, that would be Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Maine, New Hampshire, Puerto Rico. That's the First Circuit. Now we have case law in the First Circuit that says this is a clearly established right, your right to videotape police. But the case that I gave you is actually a case that came out of Denver, and that's in the 10th Circuit. And in the 10th Circuit, even though a bunch of other circuits had said this right exists, and in fact, in this case, even though the police officers admitted that they were trained that this right existed, the 10th Circuit said they got qualified immunity. They were not held liable because there was no case on point from the 10th Circuit. Now, the 10th Circuit didn't decide whether this conduct violates the Constitution or not. It just said the law wasn't clearly established. So if you're in Denver and this happens again, the law is still not clearly established. So you get this kind of vicious circle where case after case, unless the court decides to decide the merits of a question, you're not getting the law clearly established. This doctrine of qualified immunity, this clearly established notion, has been criticized very heavily by both scholars and judges from both sides of the aisle. I mean, I've been on panels with very conservative people from the Cato Institute, with very conservative judges, and with very liberal judges. And they may be criticizing it for different reasons, but the criticism is kind of uniform. And yet the Supreme Court, by my count, since 2020, June, has denied review in 35 cases where, and I've been on amicus briefs in a lot of these cases, you're trying to get the court to review and kind of revisit this doctrine, has shown absolutely no interest in doing so. It's remarkable, really. So final slide. On the federal level, I think, it's pretty dismal here because the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which would have recommended or abolished qualified immunity, is doomed. I mean, that's not going anyplace with this Congress. The Supreme Court has shown absolutely no interest in revisiting the doctrine. What you do have, you have some judges now, I think, who more and more of the lower federal court judges are criticizing the doctrine, and they are reaching out to decide the merits and saying, we're not going to just keep going around and round on this. We're going to tell you this conduct violates the Constitution, so the next time it happens, you won't get qualified immunity. What's happened is a lot of activists and folks are turning to the state courts and the state laws. So you have, especially in Colorado, New Mexico, and in New York City, you had legislation introduced that in some way either significantly modifies or does away with the qualified immunity defense. So plaintiffs might be more inclined to bring cases under state law rather than federal law. I'm going to stop there because I know I've been writing in this area for a long time, and I thought, frankly, that things would change, faster or change somewhat, and I don't see any hope in the near future, to be honest with you. So we'll see, but it's been a fascinating, for me anyway, fascinating area of the law to spend my time in, and I've really enjoyed it. And I've taught this course in police misconduct litigation. I retired from full-time teaching 5 years ago, I guess, but they asked me to come back and teach the police misconduct course for obvious reasons, in the past couple of years. So I've done it as an intersession kind of course by Zoom the last 2 years. And I'm still doing the programs for the federal judges, which I think is important because, the more that you educate them and try to convince them that this doctrine doesn't make any sense. And I some other time, maybe
Indeed.
we'll talk about why it doesn't make any sense. But anyway, thanks for being there, and thanks for listening
Thank
and
you,
hanging
Karen.
in.
And thank you to all of the presenters. If there's one thing this is made clear is that there's no lack of social justice issues facing us right now. I've asked in chat, although some of you may not have seen that, if you do want to stay for another 15 minutes and engage the presenters in a little question and answer session, we're willing to extend the session for 15 minutes to do that. Otherwise, thank you all very much for coming. And I personally feel that I have just gotten the teeniest taste of each person's story, and I want to spend about an hour with each of you. So at this point, I'll open it up to questions. For those of you who are wondering what's coming up next in March, there's a spirituality program, which should be amazing, with Quinn Horgan talking about her experience in Buddhism, Karen Foley Deutsch, who is a UU spiritual advisor, Ginny Meeker Monkowitz, who will talk about Celtic Christianity, and Kathy White, who, I don't want to get this wrong, Kathy, but who's talking about some of the spiritual dimensions of our looking at the end of life issues. So that's coming up on February 18th. Look for your links, look for your announcements. And I
mean
don't have
March
February.
18th, Donna?
I'm sorry, March 18th. Yeah,
Okay,
February
okay.
would be hard to do.
Okay.
I don't see any questions in chat. Would somebody like to come in at this point?
I have a
will.
question.
Okay.
I missed part of this because we went for a walk and it went longer than we live right near the redwoods. So we went for a walk in the forest. So I missed the beginning. How do we get access to the recordings if we want to listen to them?
Marty, why don't you speak to that? Marty has wisely vanished.
No, she's there.
Oh, okay.
I'm here. It's a matter of staying tuned. I have written countless emails to folks at the college, and they keep saying, we're working on this, it will happen. So now that there are 3, we have some ammunition. And I think as we get closer to reunion, things will kind of pipe up. I have to say that they've had some staff turnover, some sickness, and so I feel badly for them. I feel badly I keep nagging. So we just have to be patient. And I too want to commend our 3 speakers today for all of their efforts. I think they're inspirational. And I think, like our artists and our musicians, we have so much to be proud of in the class of 1967.
I agree with that.
Absolutely. More questions? And there's so much.
So we basically need to bombard Wells College saying, would you please set up a website so we can access these?
I'm not
Basically-
sure that's I don't think that's a very friendly approach.
No, not
So-
bombard. That's the wrong word. Can we simply ask the alumni relations to please work on setting up a website so we can have access to these?
Hey, Jane,
Yeah.
I'm doing that.
Oh, good.
We have two trustees here. Perhaps they have
I'll
more
s-
influence, but
Well, I'll speak to that. I will certainly mention it to the person who I think is probably in charge. Know that there are a number of staff turnovers, some very unexpected, and they are working flat out. But I will definitely tell them that these are presentations that really ought to be heard and will do Wells and the image of Wells a lot of good, and they ought to do it as fast as they can. Because I think you guys have done an incredible job on this. It's been wonderful.
I just wanted to
Feel
comment
free
that
to
Ollie
bombard.
does this. Ollie does this and has the website set up for that. And they are able to put it online within 2 or 3 days, at least within the when the talk is given on a Monday. So we get access on it Tuesday or Wednesday. I don't know how difficult that is, but we could contact an Ollie to see how that's done, or certainly the one here at Humboldt County. At
Okay,
Humboldt
I'll
State University.
mention that there's a prototype out there that we could copy and see if that's helpful.
And because we
Thanks.
do all our talks on Zoom,
Mhm.
so it must not be difficult.
I think they, Martha, aren't the learning by the lakes?
yes.
Isn't that
So the
record-
technology's there,
I
the
think the
know-how is
technology
there.
is there.
There's a stumbling block. And thank you, Fiona, for stepping up, and we'll appreciate your help as always.
Okay,
And if I can
I'll
help
do my
by
best.
checking it out, I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you, Jane.
Thank you, Jane.
Useful might be letting the college know how wonderful these talks have been and how much people are now engaging with Wells. I'm sure they'll
Yeah.
love to hear that. Any other questions for the presenters? Betsy?
I think Karen had a question.
It wasn't really a question. It's just a grateful comment. It's so good to hear about social justice programs that are working, because my experience in being in churches is that there, the social action committees, and a lot of it seems to be spinning wheels, and I get it's very discouraging to me, and it's I love it when I hear about a program that people are engaged in that's really changing people's lives. So thank you for telling us about those.
Yeah.
Ben? No?
I'm really interested in, well, first of all, I had no awareness of any of those field trips that were taken down to the South while we were in college. That was a missed opportunity for me. But anyway, what I'm most concerned about is how are we educating our children on anti-racism? And we have up in Michigan, I lived in a town that was middle class white, and across the river was African American. And so we developed this program of bringing first grade classrooms, meeting another first grade classroom in a neutral area. And what we try to do is make it fun, building friendships, and directly addressing the issue of stereotype and those kinds of things. And so, I just wanted to put that out there. It's really important that we start this healing process early in the childhood.
Yes.
Thank you, Mary. Deborah, did you want to speak to that?
I just wanted to say amen to that. That's really important and really good. And relationships, I was struck listening to all these, including mine, how relationships are so important. And people's stories and lived experiences are what connect and heal and open up our minds to each other. And so that's great, Mary. Yeah.
Did anyone,
Unfortunately,
I'm sorry, I just one more thing. Did anyone visit Harriet Tubman's home in Auburn? Is it Auburn?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I mean, this was long before she was well known. That's really interesting.
yeah. Unfortunately, from the school standpoint, all this issue about critical race theory has caused a lot of people to come forward and say, why are schools teaching that? Well, schools are not that, our schools are not teaching it. I mean, it's more maybe college level, possibly, but the far right is using it as a way to go back and say, we don't need to be teaching. We don't need to, it's making our kids feel badly that they think that they're responsible for well, it's a bunch of ridiculous reasoning, but we all need to stand up and help to support our public schools and what Mary is saying, teaching kids and getting them to see what history was. With Debbie talking about the stories and the history. They need to hear it.
I was going to say that I taught ninth graders and they were still reading To Kill a Mockingbird, which I think is not about race. It's about, well, if it is, it's about, the black man being shot 16 times. So I had my honors kids reading Just Mercy, and then they loved it. They liked it much better than they liked To Kill a Mockingbird. And then we went and heard Brian Stevenson when he came to Iowa City and spoke. And then we all went out to dinner and talked about it. So it was a wonderful experience. And Kingsley Briggs Eaton worked for Brian Stevenson. She was his personal secretary, and she developed an amazing relationship with one of the black guys that was imprisoned and then was released, and she's still really, really good friends. So I think
That is so great. But those books are top books on the book banned list too. So.
Brian Stevenson is amazing. I've heard him speak 3 times, and I was on a program with him out in the 10th Circuit, actually. He is just incredible. One of the best speakers too that you'll ever hear. So if you get a chance to hear him, make sure you do.
And I bet if Mr. Trelease were around, he would take students to the Lynching Memorial and Slavery Museum. And I would love to hear Kingsley talk about this.
Betsy?
Just going to say, we hope to have a second program on social justice initiatives, and we're very much hoping that Kings is going to talk about her work at EJI.
Oh, good. It was really sort of good for me to put this thing together, because I have to confess, I left Wells and felt like how to say it, how I wish I hadn't gone there, not because of you guys, that's why I loved it, but because I thought I was out of what was going on at that point. And now I hear this and I feel better. And I remember that voter registration drive that I talked about. And it wasn't exactly a field trip, Mary, but it was, it changed my life. And so that happened at Wells. So I started kind of having a little bit different feeling about it. And probably if I'd gone to a big university, I would have gotten a police record earlier and never graduated. So it's probably a good thing to be have there in Aurora, New York.
I think from a Wells College standpoint, that our experiences, you talk about stories and relationships, but if you look at our class as a whole, the number of things that we experienced on a very personal level are phenomenal. And I think there should be a way that we could be connected to the students to be able to give, even if it's a Zoom class where you get people that have done. Deborah, your stuff with SDS that you didn't even go into is unbelievable.
I'm not sure I want to, but I'll yeah. Anyway,
but I think there's such a wealth of knowledge that's contained in all these stories, and for them to hear it from somebody who went to Wells, and even though they're in an idyllic, ivory tower kind of experience, look at what you can make from that. So I really, I wish I'd asked my grandmother all kinds of questions that I never did because of what they lived through. We've got a class of grandmothers now, that we're missing a boat. Wells is missing the boat. If they don't figure out, with technology being what it is, it would not be hard to do. And it would be phenomenal for everybody.
I'd like to find out how many of us, well, I'm not included because I haven't been brave enough, but have some kind of records, because I know my dear friend and my roommate have, in fact, I've crossed paths with her on the Hill after Quinn has been arrested and bailed out for marching and being, blocking the Senate chambers. So I think we've got a really, not only do we have a wonderful class, but we got a lot of brave people out there.
Got a lot of ex-cons here, right?
Fortunately, we know some lawyers, so it's all good.
When I was preparing mine, I actually was thinking about how I totally had no idea there was such a thing as a career in urban and regional planning. And maybe one of the things that we could try to convince Wells to do is have interviews with people who've had different careers, that they could talk about them, because I'm sure there's still students on campus who don't know the range of possibilities that are out there.
I think it also would be good, just especially stories like Deborah's. The student body today, as you can imagine, is quite different from the student body that was there when we were there. So I think we're like 40% or more students of color. And for them to hear stories like this from what they may have perceived as this kind of all white, Lily, whatever, girls' school back in the 60s, to hear that, people actually engaged in this kind of work, and I think it would create bonds that might be very good for the school, and for the students.
If there's a theme that's come out of today for me, it's that, telling our stories, connecting with other people really is what makes the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And Wells needs to hear that. I can remember our 45th reunion vividly. And I can remember then seeing people at the 50th and even older and thinking, oh, aren't they sweet? and I don't perhaps have the imagination to see that, inside these people are amazing, amazing women, and we are all women. The students really need to hear that, and they don't. I don't think it occurs to them to ask.
I don't know if anybody read there's that 108-year-old woman.
Yeah.
Did you read her?
That was wonderful.
Amazing. And I guess the place where she is, the assisted living place where she's living, there are 3 other Wells graduates there, which is kind of incredible.
No way.
Yeah. That's what her son wrote on the, there was some kind of a comment sort of section or something, after the magazine article. And I mean, that's incredible. So if she's 108, I'm thinking she's the oldest one, but it says something about something. I don't know what, but very impressive story. Yeah.
I thank you all for being willing to stay late so that we can have just a slight chance here to interact. And thank you again to the presenters. You were all So inspiring.
And the
Thank you.
organizers.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for putting it together.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Donna.
Donna. Okay. And Marty, thank you. Yeah,
Tune in next month.
okay.
It's in
Will
the
do.
chat.
Be well,
Okay.
everybody. Yeah.